Hi guys, introducing our 6th potholder in the 2024 Potholders Galore Crochet Along, the Stroll in the Park Potholder. This potholder uses a combination of the half double crochet and double crochet stitch to create a beautiful rib texture. Like the previous potholders, it's crocheted in the round, so it's double thick and you can use it safely in your kitchen. You can find the free written pattern linked in the description box below, but before we dive in, let's look at our Crochet-Along Spotlight. Let's give it up for our fellow crocheters, the lovely Sharron Watson, Jean Myers, Wilma Weathers Maddox, Niete Kluver, Bethann McMillin, and Catherine Glad. I hope that I pronounced everyone's name right, but if not, I apologize. If you would like to share a picture of your finished potholder, you can do that in our Crochet Along Facebook group here. Without further ado, let's get started and dive into our potholder. Here are all the supplies that you need to get started. To start our potholder, we are going to leave a nice long tail for weaving in our ends, and we're going to make a slip knot, place it on our hook, and tighten it up. Now there are two different sizes of potholders that we can make. We can make a 7x7 or an 8x8. For the 7x7, you're going to chain 31. For the 8x8, you are going to chain 35. And if you'd like to make a custom sized potholder, you can chain any number. To start round 1, what we're going to do is we're going to skip the first 2 chains. So the one that's directly beside our hook, we're going to skip our second chain, and we're going to go into the 3rd chain from our hook. This one right here, we're going to yarn over and we're going to make a double crochet into that chain. So yarn over, insert your hook under the top loop of that chain, yarn over and draw up a loop, so we have 3 loops on our hook, yarn over, pull through the first 2 loops, yarn over and pull through the last 2 loops. And that makes a double crochet. Now the first 2 chains that we skipped, those are our beginning chain 2 and they do not count as a stitch. So the first double crochet that we made, that's our first stitch. So we're going to mark that with our stitch marker. Now going into the next chain underneath the top loop, we're going to make a double crochet, and we're going to do this all the way across. We're going to make a double crochet into each chain until we get to the last chain of our row. Okay guys, we're at the end of row 1. We just have 1 chain left to work into. So when we get here, we're going to make 3 double crochets into the same chain, and what that does is it's going to make our corner or the edge of our potholder. What we're going to do now is we're just going to rotate our work so that we can work along the bottom of our chain. And this is the chain that we just worked into, that we just made our corner into. So we're just going to ignore it and we're going to find our next chain. It's this chain right here and it already has a stitch in it. So we're going to insert our hook going underneath the bottom of our chain, and we're going to make a double crochet. Now we're going to find the next chain, insert your hook under the bottom loop of our chain and make a double crochet. And we're going to do this all the way across until we get to our final chain. Alright guys, we just have 2 chains left to work into for round 1. So we're going to work into the second last chain as normal, but when we get to the last chain, this one is right here. this is our last chain, and this is our beginning chain 2 that doesn't count as a stitch. So insert your hook into that last chain, and we're going to complete our corner. So we're going to make 2 double crochets into the same chain, and we're going to mark that last stitch that we made with our stitch marker. Now we're going to find the first stitch of the round, which is marked by your stitch marker. We're just going to remove it, insert our hook going underneath both loops, yarn over, pull through the stitch and the loop on your hook to make a slip stitch. So that we don't lose track, we're going to remark that first stitch of round 1 with our stitch marker. And this is what round 1 looks like. To start round 2, we're going to turn our work so that the back side of round 1 stitches are facing us. And we're going to chain 1 to start. Now we're going to find our first stitch of the round, which is marked by this yellow stitch marker. So we're just going to remove the stitch marker. We're going to insert our hook into that first stitch going underneath the front and back loop, and we're going to make a half double crochet. So to make a half double crochet, we're going to yarn over, insert your hook underneath the front and back loop of the stitch, yarn over and draw up a loop so you have 3 loops on your hook, yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. And that makes your first half double crochet of round 2. So we're just going to mark that with our stitch marker. Now again guys, we're going to do this all the way around. So we're going to find our next stitch, go underneath both loops and make a half double crochet. And we're going to do this all the way around. So insert your hook into each stitch and make 1 half double crochet. We're coming up along the edge of our potholder along the corner here. So again guys, just work 1 half double crochet going into the front and back loops of each stitch. Slow and steady until you're around that corner, and then working along the other side of your potholder. We just reached our last stitch marker, which marks the end of round 2. So we're just going to remove the stitch marker. We're going to insert our hook into that stitch going underneath both loops, and we're going to make our last half double crochet of round 2. Again guys, mark this stitch with your stitch marker so that you don't lose track. And now we're going to find our first stitch of round 2 marked by our stitch marker. We're just going to remove it. We're going to insert our hook going underneath both loops, yarn over, pull through the stitch and through the loop on your hook, and that makes a slip stitch. Now with your stitch marker, we're going to remark that half double crochet that we worked into. And there we go. So this is what round 2 looks like. To start round 3, we're going to turn our work and we're going to chain 2 to start. Now our work is already starting to fold in on itself and make a little pouch, and from here on out, even numbered rounds are going to be on the right side, which means that we're going to be working them along the outside of our potholder. And odd numbered rounds, like round 3, means that we're going to be working along the inside of our potholder. So for round 3, what we're going to do is we are not going to be working into the front and back loops like we have been. We're actually going to work into something called the third loop. So if you tilt your work a little bit so that you're looking at the top of your half double crochet stitches, you're going to see that there's 2 loops. There's a front loop, which is closest to you, and then there's a back loop, which is furthest from you. But if you look along the inside of your stitch, you're going to see a third loop, and this loop is just below, sits just below the front loop. It's this loop right here. This is called our third loop, so we're going to be working into that loop all the way around. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove our stitch marker, which marks our first stitch of the round. And we're going to find that third loop. This loop is sits just below our front loop, which is at the top here. So go into that third loop and make your first double crochet. And then remark this with your stitch marker. Find the next third loop. So this is the loop directly below our front loop at the top here. Make your double crochet, and so on. Go into every third loop around and make one double crochet. And the way that you know that you're doing this right is, so this is the back side of our work, and this is the front side or the right side. On the right side, you should still be able to see two loops, your front and back loops here, and this creates a ribbed or ridged effect. We're at the end of round 3 where our last stitch marker is. So we're going to remove that stitch marker and we're going to find that third loop of the stitch. This one's always a little hard to see, so if it helps you, you can tilt your work just so that you can see the front and back loop of the stitch, and then the one just below it right here, we're going to insert our hook there and make our last double crochet. Mark that with your stitch marker, and again guys, we're going to find our first stitch of the round marked by our stitch marker, and you can remove it if you would like to, but if not, you can move it aside and insert your hook underneath both loops of the stitch and make your slip stitch. Okay, if you did remove your stitch marker to make your slip stitch, just make sure that you remark your stitch because you don't want to lose track. This is what round 3 looks like. This is going to be the wrong side of our work. If we just kind of push our work out and keep round 3 on the inside, this is what the right side of our work looks like with that nice ribbed edge. Alright guys, to start round 4, what we're going to do is we're just going to flip our work inside out so that the right side of our work, that ribbed edging, is facing us, and we're going to chain 1 to start. So we're going to find that first stitch of the round right here marked by our stitch marker. So we're just going to remove it, insert our hook into that stitch going underneath both loops, and we're going to make a half double crochet. Now mark this stitch with your stitch marker because this is our first stitch of round 4. And into every stitch around, we're going to make a half double crochet, always going underneath both loops, the front and back. Alright guys, we're coming up on the end of round 4, so we have this last stitch marked by our stitch marker, so just remove the stitch marker and we're going to insert our hook going underneath both loops of that stitch, and we're going to make our last half double crochet of the round. Mark this stitch with your stitch marker. And what we're going to do is find our first stitch, and this one's marked again by a stitch marker. If you guys would like to, you can remove this stitch marker, but you don't have to. If you can do it, then just move the stitch marker aside and insert your hook underneath both loops of the stitch and make a slip stitch to close the round. So this is what round 4 looks like. Remember guys that this is the right side of our work because you can see the ribbed edging. To start round 5, we're going to turn our work so that we're working along the inside of our pot holder. And we are going to chain 2. Round 5 is going to be a round of double crochets, and again guys, from here on out we're going to be working these double crochets into the 3rd loop of our half double crochets. If you tilt your work so that you're looking at the top of the stitch, there's a front loop and a back loop. The front loop is closest to you and the back loop is furthest from you. And then just below the front loop, just below it, is that 3rd loop. We're going to insert our hook underneath that 3rd loop for these rounds. So remove your stitch marker. This marks your first stitch. Yarn over, insert your hook underneath that 3rd loop and make your first double crochet. Mark this stitch with your stitch marker. And we're going to find our next 3rd loop right here. Gonna go underneath it and make a double crochet. And we're going to continue this all the way around, always working into that 3rd loop. And the way you know that you're doing this right, if we kind of turn our work so that the right side is facing us, you should be able to see 2 loops. So you should still be able to see your front and back loops, and this creates our nice ribbed or ridged edge. We're at the end of round 5 and we've just reached our stitch marker, and this marks our last stitch of the round. So just remove this stitch marker and we're going to look for that 3rd loop out front right here, and we're going to make our last double crochet of the round. Remark this stitch with your stitch marker, and we're going to find the first stitch of the round marked by our stitch marker. And if you guys would like to, if you're able to, you don't have to remove your stitch marker, but just insert your hook under both loops of that first stitch and make a slip stitch to close the round. So this is what round 5 looks like, and on the right side of our work, this is what it will look like. Alright guys, let's pretend that we are at the end of our pot holder, and now it's going to be time to seam our pot holder closed. So you might end up where you're working along the inside of your pot holder. If that's the case, just make sure to turn your pot holder so that it's facing right side out with the ridged edges facing you. Alright guys, before we start, it might be a nice idea to mark the first and last stitch of your last round. This just is so that we know where to insert our hook first when we're closing our pot holder. So what we're going to do is we're going to chain 1 and we're going to find our first stitch on the front. It's marked by our stitch marker. Just remove that, yarn over, insert your hook into that stitch going underneath both loops. Now you're going to find your matching stitch at the back. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove our stitch marker, insert our hook into that matching stitch at the back going underneath both loops, and we're going to make a half double crochet, and that just joins those 2 stitches together. So from here on out, we are going to line up our stitches. We're going to go into the front stitch going under both loops, and we're going to go find the matching stitch at the back, go underneath both loops, and we're going to make a half double crochet. And we're going to do this all the way across. Okay guys, we're nearing the end, so we just have 2 stitches left to work into, so just do your best to go under both stitches. When you get to the last one, you can go through this last stitch and poke it out the back and make your half double crochet. So this is what our pot holder looks like right now. We've seamed the top closed, so everything is nice and straight and flat. Alright guys, now it's time to make our chain circle. So what we're going to do is chain 13. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Now we're going to find our last half double crochet that we made, and we're going to insert our hook under the front loop of the stitch, and going on the diagonal we're going to pick up those 2 loops that make up our stitch. So right now we have gone under 3 loops. Now we're going to yarn over, pull through the loops of the stitch and through the loop on your hook, and that makes a slip stitch. Now pull up on the loop on your hook to make a nice long tail, and then when you're ready, trim it. Thread your yarn needle with your tail, and what we're going to do is we're just going to poke our needle through the center of our stitch and in through the center of our pot holder. That just kind of tightens up our chain circle really nicely. And at this point we can make a knot to secure our tail, weave it through a few more stitches, and then when we're ready, trim it. So this is what your pot holder should look like. Obviously yours is going to be a bit bigger, but I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial, and I will see you in 2 weeks on Wednesday, September 18th for pot holder number 7. I hope you all have a wonderful day and happy crocheting. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.